Welcome to OTR Debate, a podcast where three lawyers debate everything big and small. And now we're here at C2E2.
Yeah, I am a immigration lawyer, but I am here as Phoenix Wright, a defense attorney.
And what is your name, actually?
My name is Mucci.
Okay.
And this is Lando.
I'm Lando. I'm here as Murdock. I'm a prosecutor, but today I'm going to pretend to be a defense attorney.
We're both defense attorneys today, actually.
Okay, yeah.
Let's start our own firm.
What do we got going today?
Well, we're going to be discussing the law of superheroes, essentially. And we have some topics that we want to discuss about, just superheroes in the law, best depictions of trials in comic books, things like that.
Yeah. Should we go in?
Yeah, let's go in.
Let's do it.
So, here at C2E2, we're seeing a lot of superheroes, of course, and you're dressed up as one of them.
Sort of.
Sort of.
The defense attorney version of the
Yes, his alter ego.
Right.
So, we kind of discussed this with Scooby-Doo where we prosecuted them. But how would superheroes fare in the real world with real-world issues and our real-world laws?
Yeah, I think in the comic book world, they're really dealing with a different set of laws, a different set of everything that governs them, right? So, when these superheroes are doing certain things, they're kind of getting away with a lot, and they're not really facing the legal consequences, with certain exceptions that we'll talk about later.
Right, the trials that we talk about.
Right, but so if the superheroes that we've encountered here, like all of them essentially, if they were in the real world, there'd be some massive consequences to them and to everyone else, I think.
So who are the chief examples you think of ones that would have those big consequences?
I mean, just criminally, we talk about the Punisher killing like 10, 20, 50 people in a comic book or so. I think he would probably get caught.
And what is his reason for killing people? Or not that matters necessarily, because you shouldn't fucking kill people, but...
Just a very angry man. His family died, and he had to take his revenge on everybody.
Out of his own hands, basically.
Yeah, sort of. But I think he also kills petty criminals. So I don't think that really accounts for much. I think he would still be prosecuted. And even people like superheroes like Batman. In the earlier comics, he also killed people. Now I think that really changed when the Joker came around, and they really wanted to keep this beloved supervillain and
going in
the comics, and they kind of came to a crossroads of, okay, do we have him kill the Joker, which is this massive supervillain, or do we give him a rule now that says,
and these so Batman is also, outside of killing people, causing great bodily harm to a lot of people,
right?
But also the supervillains, or the main villains he faces, he's beating up people that are mentally ill, it seems.
So,
I mean, they are put into an asylum, literally.
Right. Right.
So
Batman is just super, super problematic. That he's.
Yeah.
I mean, he really has the rogue gallery, right? That's his.
Rogue gallery.
His villains are all in the same place because they're suffering from mental health issues, really. And as a person that has that much money, you would think that he would do something in terms of...
Pay your taxes, Batman.
Pay your taxes, Batman.
So, and then, I was thinking, too, about Spider-Man, right? He is just webbing up criminals, right? And leaving them webbed up for the police to find. Does that help the police in, incriminating them at all? Or, the prosecution? Doing justice?
As a prosecutor, I would hate to think that I had a case that came to me with the evidence being a defendant that was webbed up in front of the courthouse or in front of a police station that said he did this crime, signed Spider-Man.
Right.
Because there are so many issues to this. What kind of evidence do we have here? We have none. And I guess arguably you could say that we have the evidence, the witness testimony of Spider-Man. But at the end of the day, could he take the stand? I mean, there becomes constitutionality issues in terms of the Sixth Amendment. I mean, the Confrontation Clause...
Right to be confronted by...
Right. He has a right to... So every defendant has a right to be confronted by witnesses that are going to be testifying against them, right? So if you don't know who this person is that's saying that you did X, Y, and Z, how does...
It's not just. It's not fair for on the defense side of things.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it would just violate... there's Daredevil right there. It's obviously a fraud. So I'm standing right here. It would violate the defendant's right, right to confrontation.
Right.
Because in terms of trials, we have certain things that when you know who is confronting you, your defense attorney can counter that testimony through what's called impeachment. Mm-hmm. And impeachment, you know what impeachment is, right?
Yes.
Okay, so impeachment is essentially the act of discrediting a witness, either by...
I'm Phoenix Wright. I know all about discrediting witnesses.
Of course you do.
Go ahead, sorry.
A, B, and C, X, Y, and Z.
Yes.
You just got to push the buttons.
Present. Take that.
Objection. So there's different ways of discrediting a witness. If you don't know who that person is, you're not going to be able to do those things as a defense attorney. I think they're having a lot of fun behind us. So we'll talk more on that later. Mucci, tell us about your favorite comic book courtroom case. Do you have one?
Okay. Yeah, so one that I really think is interesting is in She-Hulk, where She-Hulk represents Spider-Man in a defamation case against J. Jonah Jameson, which I think is honestly a long time coming.
Yeah, I would think so.
Now, in the trial, there's a part where Spider-Man has to go on the stand, and as you said earlier, he's masked, and it doesn't want to reveal his identity. Sixth Amendment confrontation clause issues there, but there's some Avengers technology that allows for verification of his identity.
I wonder if that was courtroom approved. Who put that through? Did the judge allow it? Did both sides agree to that? All issues.
So many issues.
So many issues with that.
Can't be exploded in 22 pages in a comic book.
No.
But so one of the witnesses is Jonah's own son, who in issue 1 of Amazing Spider-Man, Spider-Man saved from a shuttle crash.
Right, because he was an astronaut, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. And Jonah, of course, wrote, Spider-Man's a menace. He caused the shuttle to crash, and he set this whole thing up.
Of course.
Very, completely made up, right? And so his son actually testifies that, no, there was an investigation done, and nothing, no one messed up anything. It messed up on its own. Spider-Man didn't do anything.
What would Spider-Man have done to a shuttle?
I don't know. Jonah thinks he has powers that he doesn't, even more than what he has, I guess.
More than a spider would have.
More than a spider would have. But what's interesting is the real-world implications of defamation, right? Okay. So as a public figure, if Spider-Man is trying to prove a defamation case, he has to prove that the person that wrote
Starting to get my vision back.
The person who wrote it had to act with actual malice. So that means Jameson had to have written something either with actually knowing it was false about Spider-Man, or with reckless disregard for the truth.
Right.
Now,
it's Jonah.
And yes, he's clearly, as you see him throughout the series, trying to get more money. But sometimes he is kind of struck by a humanitarian impulse to point out this what he sees as a menace, and maybe he is acting from actual belief, Right. And there's a reason that's a high standard to meet, though, is the thing. We don't want our public figures silencing people because they reported something bad about them by saying we want them to have to meet a higher standard, right? To actually prove it was done with actual malice, reckless disregard, or actually knowing it was untrue. Okay,
so you're saying that just because he was an angry guy doesn't mean that he had some malice behind that particular accusation or claim.
Yes, or even all of his, because he does seem to be. He does seem to truly believe that Spider-Man's a menace. So I don't know. So that was an interesting court case.
How did it play out?
They ended up settling.
Of course.
And Jonah didn't want to pay money, so he would settle for him and Peter Parker handing out retractions in chicken costumes the next day.
Wow, that seems like...
That's ridiculous at the end there.
Yeah, maybe just. So I guess the courtroom case that I've got involves Matt Murdock, the person that I'm dressed up as today. Very lazily, I put these sunglasses on. Really can't see.
This comes together well, though.
Yeah, I mean, I had the suit, tie, and everything, but I really can't see shit with this stuff on. So I guess that kind of adds up because Matt Murdock is blind. So
Yeah, it adds up as that.
So the case that I wanted to highlight was a case where Matt Murdock represents the Punisher. Okay, Frank Castle. It's not in the sacred timeline or the it breaks off from the comic books in that the Punisher kills like the MCU. I think is what it's called. He just kills everyone.
Okay.
It's an alternate universe where Frank Castle finds out that his family's at like Central Park, and the Avengers and the X-Men are battling the Kree in Central Park. It's a very contained situation, I guess. Frank Castle goes there, guns blazing, finds out that his wife and kids were killed in the crossfire, and the superheroes are there. Cyclops tries to console him, tries to apologize. He doesn't care. He shoots Scott Summers right in the face. He kills Hawkeye at the same time. There's so many people that are there. He's shooting at everyone. Ultimately, they take him in. And Daredevil was actually there in that fight. He saw, the Punisher's family get killed.
Right.
He was there, but the fact that he has such a commitment to due process and representation for a defendant is really something that I think should be highlighted because, if you step away from, he's kind of a witness to the crime, you really shouldn't be representing him. He loves justice so much that he was willing to represent the Punisher for killing, multiple of his friends.
Friends, coworkers.
Coworkers, he sees them on the job every day, and all of a sudden they're getting capped by the Punisher. So he represents them. He's found guilty and is given a life sentence.
Well,
seems
accurate to real life.
Mass murder.
Yes.
Anyway, so he escapes and then goes on this rampage. But Matt Murdock tried to give him the best representation possible, so I think that that's something to be commended.
Yeah.
And we did see a little bit of it on the, in the MCU extended TV universe where Charlie Cox, who plays Matt Murdock, represented the Punisher. Just an amazing performance where there's so much like emotion and like raw, just aggression from the Punisher on that show, which was awesome. So that's why I really like that case. Okay.
So speaking of mass murderers, Jean Grey, one of the biggest mass murderers really in the Marvel universe. Yes. In her villainous incarnation as Dark Phoenix, she destroys entire planets, maybe even entire solar systems. She does mass murder on a universal scale, basically. There's an issue or a series of issues called The Trial of Jean Grey that was a crossover X-Men and Guardians of the Galaxy in the maybe 2013, 2014. And
is Star-Lord in it?
Yes, he is.
Oh, okay, nice.
And Jean Grey. Well, what you know about the all new X-Men is that series is that it is the 60s X-Men brought from their early sort of training days brought forward in time to the sort of the present day at that time. So Jean Grey never becomes Dark Phoenix. This version of Jean Grey never becomes Dark Phoenix, but a version of her does and does all this murder. So she's held on trial for the crimes of killing, massive amounts of people, beings around the world.
So stuff she hasn't done.
Yes.
She hasn't done yet.
Or something. Yeah.
Okay. Or something.
In a way, it's almost like a different version of her because she never got to grow into that point of being like the Dark Phoenix.
Okay.
But so it does seem manifestly unjust to hold someone on trial for something they really didn't do. But at the same time, can you really blame them for wanting some justice for this horrific, mass death? Because Dark Phoenix was supposed to be kill all these people or aliens, whatever, and then have died. And so they're like, so she's alive, but it's a different version of her in a way.
I gotcha. So they're trying to punish someone because it's, akin to maybe a clone or something.
In a way, it is kind of. So maybe there's a different way they could go about it, though. Maybe they could have shown her or, implanted a memory in her brain of what she did so that she knows not to do it again, rather than, sort of punish her or lock her up or whatever.
Right.
But anyway, that was an interesting case, I think. Moral conundrum there.
It just seems very unethical to, and this wasn't any kind of court on our world, right?
Of course not. It was like some universal, like planetary, court.
Interesting. So they have their own rules, and part of me thinks that if they're punishing this other Jean Grey, what's them to stop from just holding all these trials with like clones, with twins maybe?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Ethical questions, yeah. So I like that one a lot.
There is a series of comics that deal with the Civil War, right? So their Civil War, not our Civil War, that dealt with the issue of registration and registering superheroes and their powers and who the actual people are underneath the masks. We saw Civil War in the MCU, but it was like at a much smaller scale.
Version?
Right.
Okay.
I mean, there was like 10 people in that, whereas in the comic books, everyone's involved in Civil War, right? So the issue of registration and the issue of having those superheroes reveal who they are and register with the government, how do you think that sort of thing would play out here in the U.S., in Chicago, specifically?
So, yeah, I mean, the government forcing these superpowered individuals to register, what does that stop the government from then going somewhere else with that data and keeping them from assembling with each other, violating the First Amendment right to assembly, right? And I think this maybe becomes even more clear with the X-Men, right?
Right. They would of course do that after having everyone register their superpowers, their identities, because once they know who has what superpower, they absolutely wouldn't let them congregate.
Join forces. And,
because that would be just a squad of, essentially weapons that could potentially, hurt the country, right?
Yes. And, I mean, like I said, it gets even more clear with the X-Men, where that's literally from their birth, from their DNA, they are mutants. They are born this way.
I don't know if you could call them mutants.
Yeah, maybe that's an outdated term in the comics, but X-Men has always had allegories to issues such as the Civil Rights Movement, discriminating against people on the basis of race, religion, gender, sexual orientation, particularly stuff that's immutable.
Right.
So,
and that's always been a part of the comics, right? They're different, they struggle. And we saw that a little bit with the X-Men movies, with the teenagers in the original X-Men movies, when the teenagers were kind of like struggling with their identity and who they are and why they're different. That's always been a part of it, and that's kind of translated in the movies.
Yes, and so the government would then be like taking this minority group and forcing them to do something that they don't require other groups to do, the majority group to do. Right. Which is potentially violative of the 14th Amendment. There's a word in here. The 14th Amendment Equal Protection Clause. So, in which, after the Civil War, that amendment guaranteed equal protection to all people under the law. And particularly, initially, it was applied very heavily to race, of course, because they were coming out of the Civil War. You can't make a law that is discriminating against African American black people after the Civil War. That had to be enshrined in the Constitution because it was fucked up before that, and of course been fucked up since. But
which ties back to the comic books Civil War.
That
I see you, Marvel. I see you.
Yeah, I see the exact connection you're making by using that exact phrase. But that, there's certain tests like strict scrutiny if you are passing any kind of law that potentially would have a discriminatory impact against people on the basis of race. It would have to pass a very, very strict test to, where the government really has to prove that its aims are going to meet the means, but it's made through this highest standard. And it's interesting to say where mutation or where registering mutants or superheroes would fall in that. Gender also is a heightened scrutiny standard. So there's different standards, but it's where exactly would mutant abilities fall into that? I'm not sure,
Right.
but it still is potentially violative of their rights under the Equal Protection Clause.
I would think so. Absolutely, you're essentially discriminating against a group of people. Mm-hmm. Can't really do that.
Yeah.
And that's been first episode of Law and Superheroes T2E2. And by the way, don't forget to subscribe on YouTube. Listen to us on, what are we on?
Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anywhere you get your podcasts.
Everywhere you get your podcasts.
Anywhere and everywhere.